Starting today, what is one way in which you can begin to grow more trust in your relationships? Whether it's your professional life or your personal life, what is at least one or two things you can do to begin to cultivate more trust between you and at least one other person? All right? So one, get curious. I know it sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but get curious about another person's story. Move beyond perhaps the casual obligatory conversation. Hey, how was your weekend? And then it doesn't really go much beyond that. Show some investment, some degree of specificity in the kinds of questions you ask about that person. All right? So that you don't necessarily see them just as a direct report or as a colleague, but you recognize the human being that's standing there too. And this can look a lot of ways, okay? This doesn't have to dive incredibly deep, but maybe you find out just a little bit more about what their hobbies are, what they do like to do on the weekends, and ask them more questions about that thing. Maybe you ask them about where they're from, where did they grow up, who's their significant other, what are their kids' names. Use sound judgment, but at the same time, use curiosity as well. Right? And see what's there. Because if we're talking about building trust, part of that comes from recognizing the humanity in the person across from you, acknowledging their humanity, recognizing the fact that they have a story, they have a narrative that they're literally, even presently, constructing and building, and that you're showing some investment in that story. You're genuinely interested. That is a great foundation or bedrock upon which trust can be built. All right? 2, put a little skin in the game yourself. Share a little something about your own story. Now, I'm not saying you have to wear your heart on your sleeve. I'm not saying you have to emotionally bleed out all over the place. But give them something so that you can create more awareness about your story. And then it's almost like it's an invitation to them to ask more questions. And they can see you as a person too. You may be even surprised that you have more in common than you originally thought. But, and I use this word and I use it carefully, give yourself permission to be more vulnerable. Even if it's just moving it an inch. Again, I'm not saying that you have to rip your heart out and put it in their hands. But give yourself permission just to be a little bit more vulnerable. There is strength there. There is conviction and courage to be found there. All right? You are divulging more of your own narrative to them. And that is an invitation of trust. All right? So to walk the walk, I will use myself as an example. If I'm giving myself permission to be vulnerable, right now, in this moment, I'm letting a ton more people know one of the struggles that I'm having. And I use the word struggle intentionally, yes. My mother has dementia. She has been diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia, which has severely impacted her ability to communicate. She doesn't have the vocabulary recall that she used to. She can't really put sentences together like she used to. Not so long ago, I was sitting next to her and I saw her struggle for at least 20 minutes with merely just signing her name. And this is a woman who used to be a voracious reader, and her cursive was beautiful. And now that's been severely impacted. No one's been impacted greater than she herself. But residually as well, it's affected the people that love her, like her son, sure. Now, I'm not saying that because I need a shoulder to cry on or that I'm begging for your sympathy. But I'm going to share that so that, yeah, that's a part of my story that I'm owning. And I'm letting other people know because it gives them texture. Lets them know a little bit about where I'm at right now. And they can ask me questions about it. We can have a conversation around that. And that vulnerability creates more dialogue, which I think can be an invitation to more trust. Now, you don't necessarily have to share something that you think is oh so personal. I've said that already. But something, starting today, what is one thing perhaps you can share out? You stop this video. You have a conversation with somebody down the hall. Pick up the phone and call someone on your way home from work. Maybe you shoot it in an email. But how are you going to get curious? And how are you going to put a little skin in the game yourself? Because that intimacy, that vulnerability, that share out from both parties, that's what creates trust. That's what builds rapport. And that is what can create more meaning, depth of meaning, and impact in that relationship. And deep relationships, I'm going to go out on a limb and say deep relationships with substantial connection, that's its own kind of wealth and enrichment in a person's life. And that's my want for you. Because in the end, we really are only somebody else's memory. So what do we want our story to be? And how are we showing up in our lives? And how are we asking questions to learn about other people's story? And how are we sharing part of our own? We'd love to hear what you think. Thoughts, questions, likes, anything else. Throw it down below. I'll catch you guys the next time. Thanks.